All right. Welcome back to the Atlantic Strong podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Dickens, and tonight we have a very special guest, Danielle Philibert, who is our first CPU national champion on the show. So, Danielle, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to get to speak about powerlifting. It's not often I've been invited to podcasts, but it's usually about my job. So I get to talk about science, but to get to talk about powerlifting is a real treat.
Well, let's start there because you're living in New Brunswick now, but you're not from New Brunswick.
No, I'm from Alberta. I moved here in 2019 after I finished my PhD. So I study the effects of oil spills on fish. And being from Alberta, that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of oil research there. And I worked on the oil sands and a few oil spills in the area. And so there's actually a big research project funded at the Huntsman Marine Science Center that is looking at potential oil spills and how they could impact the Bay of Fundy. And that's what brought me here as a job. And after I started, we got renewal, and now I'm hoping to stay. I really love it out here.
So you did your PhD at University of Alberta. Did you do your undergrad there too?
Yeah. My parents have a farm about an hour north, and that's where I grew up. So I wanted to stay close. And actually, I wanted to stay in Alberta initially. That was the plan, but I couldn't find work because the economy was really not stable when I graduated. So coming out here just was a necessity just to get some sort of research position.
So you're a research associate at Huntsman Marine in St. Andrews. Do you know how long that position is going to last?
So initially, when I first started, it was a 1-year contract, and then our research got renewed for another 2 years, and we've just gotten funding for another 3-year project. So it's kind of just snowballed. Awesome. What's interesting about working at the Huntsman compared to where I worked at a university setting is the Huntsman's a non-for-profit. So instead of having core funding, we get contracted out government research projects that they need done quickly because we're not bringing in new students. We have core staff running research experiments for us. We're a lot faster than academics, and we're able to get a lot more work done. And I think that's why we get a lot of research grants at the Huntsman. And what's really unique is we have all these cool species that are native to the Bay of Fundy. We work with urchins, cod, lobster, crab. We've worked with a wide range of species, and that isn't typical of a typical university. So that's one of the advantages of working out here.
Well, and I mean, coming from, a thing like aquatic toxicology, I think this is a good place to be for something like that. Not saying that the Bay of Fundy is toxic, but compared to Alberta, there is a little bit more scope to something like that.
Yeah, and there's something to be said. Perfect. Sorry about that.
So anybody listening, Danielle, her connection dropped for a second, but we were just talking about how her line of work, which is her doctorate, her PhD is in aquatic toxicology, and how there might be a little bit more scope to that down here as opposed to in Alberta.
Yeah, well, and what's interesting about the people here is the people have they take a lot of pride in their oceans and the health of their oceans. And there's a real sense of environmental stewardship in New Brunswick that maybe isn't as kind of dominant and on people's minds as, Alberta is a little bit more industry focused. So it's kind of nice as someone who's a biologist, whose ultimate goal is to improve and kind of protect marine life in case of a spill, to work in a place where the people really care about the results here, like especially lobster fishermen. I found very passionate, and I'm sure a lot of other industries, because the people are so connected to the oceans here. People care, and it's awesome.
Right on. So, how did you get into lifting? Did you play sports growing up?
I played zero sports, absolutely none. I did the bare minimum gym to graduate. I never liked sports at all, but I did 4-H. So I dragged a steer around as part of a extracurricular. And I feel like that's the ultimate way to train for strength sports. Um, I did a lot of farm related things, and I didn't really get into sports until university, where I tried out rowing. That was the first sport I really took seriously and I really loved. It like consumed my life for a while there. I absolutely loved it. It was a struggle. I really, being so dense of a person, like I'm heavy, but I'm really short. Like I'm 5'7", so not super short for the average person, but short for a rower. So it was really hard to be a good rower because I'm rowing with women who are 6', 6'1", with way longer legs. But I'd try really hard, and I really liked that. The only reason I quit was it was really affecting my grades, because rowing as a sport takes up way more time than powerlifting. It was 3-hour training sessions twice a day, every day, 5-hour training sessions on Sunday. It was just insane amounts of time, and I just couldn't keep up with life outside of rowing. So I had to quit.
So how long between leaving rowing did you get into powerlifting?
About 2 years. I started grad school during that time, so my grades got good enough that I could squeak in, get into my program. And I kind of hit a rut where mentally I felt kind of bored and broken down, and I wanted something new. And so I started going to the gym, and I wasn't necessarily powerlifting. I thought I wanted to be a bodybuilder because I didn't realize how hard dieting would be. And I thought, oh, that's got to be easier, because powerlifting, lifting that much weight, I couldn't even imagine it at the time. Like when I started, I could only bench the bar, and I thought the bar weight didn't count. So I thought I benched 0 pounds for like a long time. I didn't realize the bar was 45 pounds. No one told me anything. I just started lifting random things based off workouts I saw on YouTube. And yeah, it kind of led to, I started doing the compound lifts because I was watching a lot of YouTube content that showed powerlifting, and powerlifters kept coming up on the feed. And on New Year's, I think it was 2015, I deadlifted, after not really training deadlifted, I was able to deadlift 300 pounds with straps, and I'm sure it was ugly as hell. But after that, I was like, I need to sign up for a meet. So that was kind of what got me into wanting to powerlift. And I didn't have a coach. I didn't work with anyone. I didn't have a plan. I think I made up my own training program going into that meet, and I read the rules and showed up on the day and had a blast. And I've been pretty much hooked ever since.
And that was 2016?
Yeah, 2016, in that kind of winter was my very first meet. And yeah, it was crazy to me. Like when I went there, all these people were like, there was people with their coaches, and they were doing their warm-ups, and I was just doing whatever someone else's warm-up was. I was just like, oh, can I work in? And I just do whatever weight they're doing, even though they were like a 63 kilo tiny little woman. I was like, whatever, it's gotta be, I'll just do it. And I just had fun. Like that was the big thing, powerlifting and just having fun in the experience. That really stuck with me.
Yeah, looking at the numbers from your first few meets, I mean, in 3 meets you go from 297 to 347 squat, 121 to 176 bench, 319 or 320 to 370 deadlift, in just your first year of competing. So
I was really lucky in that at that first meet, there was someone who walked up to me after I finished competing, and his name's Ahmed Eid, and he offered to coach me for free. And he was like, I will help you. You clearly don't know what you're doing. And I will work with you. And I worked with him. And that's when I started making real progress, because I didn't arch when I benched. I just laid on the bench. I was the worst bencher at that meet, by the way. I was like terrible. I was like just a terrible bencher. And because I'd never got hands-on training, I just kind of went with it. And it really helped having someone to give me some oversight on how to program or move a little more efficiently.
So what was the programming like when you finally got a coach?
He was it was really varied. So Ahmed, he was brand new to coaching. That's why he was looking for athletes. He saw me and he knew I would be a good one to coach. I seemed fairly coachable at the time, and it was really varied. He loved accessories, so I'd always have like 3 or 4 accessory movements, which is nothing like my programming now. Now I work with Bryce Krack, and it's much more simple, distilled down. And Ahmed liked volume, which is interesting. Now he coaches CrossFit, so I could tell he really liked the volume stuff, which works for some of my lifts, but really doesn't work for my deadlift. After that third meet, you can see I plateau on my deadlift. I actually just like last year broke a 3-year plateau on my deadlift. Like I've struggled with that lift a lot. And yeah, it worked on bench though. That's why my bench has always gone up really consistently. And I did AMRAPs. Ahmed loved. I did one entire peaking cycle where I AMRAPed like twice a week my bench press, and I've never had such sore elbows in my entire life. Brutal. But yeah, he played a lot. He was a new coach, so it's just a lot of variety.
So, somewhere in that second year, 2017, you got serious, because, I'm looking at open powerlifting. In 2017, you went to Belarus, IPF Worlds.
Yeah, that's actually my first nationals was 2017. Yeah, because I just started in 2016, and I got second to Sarah Cowan at nationals, and by a long shot. Like I think she had 100 kilos on my total. She was a phenomenal lifter, and I got second place. And how they pick people for the team is anyone can apply if you go to nationals. So I recommend everyone throw your name in. It doesn't hurt to apply if you even want the opportunity to go. And there wasn't enough of the winners. Like I think they get 8 spots in the team, and there's 7 weight classes or something. And because I was a second place person, I got sent as like the B team 84. So there was 2 of us in that weight class who got to go to Worlds. And that was a wild experience in itself, especially because I was so new to the sport still. I'd only been competing for a year. So I think I got 6th. I was middle of the pack going in. I was middle of the pack coming out, kind of like nowhere near those top lifters, but not at the bottom either, just kind of in the middle. And I had a lot of fun because the stakes were low. Like I wasn't going to medal, but I wasn't going to, bomb out. It was just like, kind of a learning experience. So I was pretty relaxed going in because I wasn't a contender. Whereas now that I'm going in and I'm the A team 84, I actually won the weight class and I'm a contender for medals. It's way more stressful. It's like I take things a lot more seriously in this prep.
So how long have you been working with Bryce Krack?
About 3 years, I think. It was, I can't remember which year it was. I think it was 2018 that Ahmed straight up 2 weeks out from a meet. And I don't fault him for this at all. He told me he hated coaching and he didn't want to coach anymore. And so I prepped myself the last 2 weeks, and I then ran Bryce Krack's free program.
Everybody.
And I
ran it for the showdown, 3 months ago.
Oh, sick. Yeah, it's a great program. I absolutely loved it. And that's why I approached him, is I liked the style of it. I liked the simplicity of it. Like there was way less accessories, kind of just what you need to get the job done type lifting. And the other thing about Bryce is, as a person, he always came off as really humble and nice. Like I had bumped into him a few times because he's in Alberta and he was at Alberta meets, reffing, coaching and whatnot. And he was always super kind to like everyone, despite in the CPU being a relatively big deal. Like I remember times when he was coaching me, people ask him for pictures, like just because, he's an insanely good deadlifter and he has a really good business he started up with Calgary Barbell.
Yeah.
So yeah, when I approached him to coach, I was surprised. I didn't actually assume he'd be the one coaching me. I was expecting to be coached by someone else from the Calgary Barbell team because, I didn't think I was that good at the time, but he took me on, and he's been a key part in my success in powerlifting, like really key. And his outlook on powerlifting and his outlook on lifting in general has been very positive for me. When I was first starting, and I'm sure it's the same with a lot of athletes, you get really caught up in the numbers, and it's really emotional. And so when you have bad days, your days totaled, and you have good days, and it's that up and down, and that's too hard to be sustainable for years at a time. So no, he has a much more moderate approach, and I think it really worked well for me as a lifter.
Yeah, I mean, he comes from that Mike Tashir school, RPE, very specific training, very little accessories. I mean, you just look at the free program. It's bench every day, squat 3 times a week, deadlift twice a week, and very little accessories. There might be some rowing, might be some curls, but really it's all based around squat, bench, and deadlift. And I've ran that program a couple times. I really like it. I like that I could, when I decided to do bench only for the Port City Showdown, I like that I could just go and get a free peaking program from a notable person and run it. And I bombed out, but that was no fault of the program. So anybody looking for a free program, especially to try a different style of training, like Bryce Krack coaches, just Google Calgary Barbell. It's on his website. It's 16 weeks with a peak. You can run it up to a competition or run it to a mock meet on your own. But if you're listening and looking for something new, give that a try.
Yeah, and also he has like a library of YouTube content that is so helpful for people wanting to get into weight training, powerlifting, like everything from gear review to like how to properly squat. A lot of free content out there. And I actually watched a lot of his videos before I hired him as a coach, and I still watch quite a few sometimes just to kind of refresh myself, because they're really well shot. Like they're incredibly well done videos. And yeah, great resources out there, especially for free, just to learn the sport.
I think that the content that he puts out, especially around geared powerlifting, is head and shoulders above what a lot of guys are putting out, especially around the actual utilization of the gear, what to buy, how to get it fit, he even has a video on how to sew it, how to alter it for you, and then how to roll it into your training, which I think is really cool. I mean, I've never really used gear other than knee wraps, but if I ever did, I would definitely be referencing those Calgary Barbell YouTube videos.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Me too. I've always wanted to. I've never tried knee wraps even. I've always wanted to. Maybe at some point I'll have to give it a go. Or even a bench shirt.
Well, knee wraps are the obvious entry point because they're the cheapest bit of equipment, and you don't have to get it fitted. You can just buy a set of knee wraps from anywhere and try them out. And if you don't like them, you're down $35. We're not talking about a Super Centurion suit that's going to be like $350 plus alterations. Like that's to me, the big barrier of entry to gear is twofold. One, it's cost. Who's got the money to buy gear? And then 2 is training partners. If you don't have a lot of training partners that use gear, it's going to be very difficult.
Yeah. Oh, and the stakes are higher if you fail, because you're stuck in a really tight burlap suit, essentially. Like that's for me, especially because I train alone in my basement. That's one of the biggest barriers. Like that's the majority of my training. I don't have a spotter, and which works fine for the kind of training I do. But for equipped lifting, you need handoffs. You need, people to help you to get in and out. And yeah, that's always a barrier for sure.
So let's talk about last year, your first CPU Nationals win. And the first time I heard your name or saw your name, other than Blair Mitchell mentioning you, was SBD put out a video about you winning or maybe it was just your top lifts at CPU Nats last year, right before the pandemic went crazy. What was that like to go to nationals and to win?
So actually, because I'd been second since my first nationals in 2017. I'd gotten second every year to Sarah Cowan. And I knew the training cycle going into 2020 that I'm like, she'll have to fight because I know I'm in top shape. And like my biggest, I went from having the most disappointing meet in 2019, which is kind of important leading into 2020. I absolutely shit the bed on deadlifts. I had a horrible meet, probably the worst meet I've ever had by a long shot. I only got my opener on deadlifts. I squatted 200 kilos, but I deadlifted like 180. Like I failed 190, like terrible meet. But I knew going into 2020 that I was going to kill it. My deadlift training was on point, and I was training out of the gym. There's a gym in St. Stephen that isn't open right now, but I was training out of there, and the plates were smaller. So I'd been doing deficit deadlifts for all my deadlifts for a long time. So I knew my deadlifts were good. And I was making PRs with those smaller plates in that gym. So I knew my training was on point. And then when I saw the roster, Sarah Cowan wasn't going to be there. And it kind of took the wind out of my sails for a minute because I was like, I want to beat her. Like, I want to be there. She's been number one for the whole time I've been powerlifting. I want the opportunity to beat her because I know I at that time I was like, I think I can do it. She'd have to bring her best. But she wasn't there. And so when I went to the meet, me and Bryce had a talk and we're like, we're just not going to dwell on what happened in 2019. We're just going to have fun with it. And we're going to focus on having fun with it. And I really did. I went 9 for 9. I got the Canadian squat record with 208 kilos. And then I got the bench record, which at the time was 111 kilos. And I benched 117.5. So I smoked that. And deadlift nowhere close because Jess Butner has that record for my weight class. It went phenomenal. I went 9 for 9, had a killer day. And actually right after I won, I got a message from Sarah Cowan. She actually messaged me on Instagram, congratulated me. We had a brief chat. She was done with powerlifting at the time. She's like, I just need a break. It was too much. And I was like, you know what? I respect that. And for her to take the time to message me meant a lot. And it kind of reinforced that I felt really proud of that moment because I'd been, second place for a long time. And it was a slow, gradual build. I went from just squatting 360 to 400, like it just year after year working on getting better. And that consistency finally paid off. And man, did it feel good. That was definitely a highlight of my powerlifting career.
So, obviously you were, hit by the same lack of competitions as the rest of us through the pandemic. What was it like coming back after more than a year away from the platform to compete back in May at the Port City Showdown? Shout out to Drew Carlton, Fundy CrossFit, RJ Forbes, Pat Stadler, all those guys. It was a great meet. It was a fantastic meet, actually. It was really well run. They had a great space. They've got really a great setup for that. So what was it like coming back to competing after more than a year away from the platform?
Oh man. So after nationals in 2020, I went back to training. I was like, I'm going to Worlds. Even though it was in Belarus again, I'm like, what are the chances? I've already been once. It's a really tough country to travel to. I was still planning on going to Worlds, and then COVID happened. Literally the minute I flew home, it was the week at, I think it was a couple days after I flew home from nationals, everything got shut down. So it was wild that we even got to compete at nationals because it was in March. And having the gyms closed, I had nowhere to train. So I actually didn't train for 6 months last year, from March till probably November. And Bryce was really great. I was like, I have nowhere to train. I don't know what to do. Can we just suspend coaching for now? And he was like, yeah, sounds good. And I messaged him, and I finally saved up enough money and bought a home gym in November because the gym in St. Stephen never reopened. And where I live, driving to St. John every day is just not realistic.
We'll talk about that gym after this.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder what happened to it. I'm like, man, that was my main training spot. But I saved up enough for a squat rack off Amazon, which I still use and I really love. For $400, I'm like, it does the job.
Yeah.
And some plates. And I got a crappy bar off Amazon. It's like 35 pounds and whippy as hell. And that's what I started training with again. And yeah, I think when I started last November, I was squatting like 225 because it'd been 6 months. I hadn't lifted. I had no endurance. Everything felt hard. So getting to the meet in Port City, it was just wild that that was 6 months after I had 6 months off, and then I was 6 months back into training, and I started hitting PRs again, which blew my mind. When I talked to Bryce, when I started training in November, I was like, oh, I'm down for a year and a half, then I'll hit PRs. Like, I'm okay with rebuild. That time off happened and it was good for me. I had aches and pains that resolved themselves and stuff. But the fact that I was able to start hitting PRs leading into that meet just blew my mind. And then, of course, like you said, the meet was phenomenally well run. And the people there are all really fun. Like, there's a real sense of community, especially in New Brunswick, even more so than Alberta. Not to pit them against each other, but Alberta's bigger, quite a bit bigger. And because New Brunswick has a lot smaller of a lifting community, everyone is just cheering for each other. There's so much camaraderie, and the meet was so fun. I thought that would be the only meet I have this year because, the chance of traveling between provinces was not, really a thing at the time. But yeah, I was ready for that to be my only meet, and I was perfectly happy with that because I had such a good time and it was so much fun. And I had my sister coaching me on the day, and she doesn't powerlift at all, but she'll just run numbers and stuff. And yeah, it was great. It was a great meet.
Yeah, I mean, I was there. I watched your squat, I watched your bench, and then I left because I had volunteered all morning, and then bombed out on the bench. And as soon as I did that, I wanted to leave and I left. But yeah, you had like 463 squat. I don't know what it is in kilos. 463 squat, 260 bench, 475 deadlift. Like, just amazing numbers.
Thank you. Yeah, it was wild. Like, I PR'd every lift, which, that 5 years into a sport, you got to take those days because they don't happen. You don't expect them to happen anymore. Yeah, it's unofficially broke my national record because I squatted 210 kilos. Yeah, which is the 463. And the bench, I chipped it with half. So it was like 118 kilos. But yeah, and wild. It was really wild. And that momentum after that meet, when Worlds became an option, I knew I had to. I'm like, now I'm uninjured. Things are feeling good. I have to take this chance, even if traveling during COVID is miserable and challenging. This is like a once in a lifetime, because who knows what happens next year. It takes one injury or life gets too busy. Like, it's too hard. You can't kind of wait for the right time. It's just never going to be the right time. You just have to go for it. So that's what kind of sealed the deal, is that meet actually.
So after that meet, you basically go right into training for Stronghold. So tell me about that transition.
Oh man, strong woman it's I'm hooked. It's really hard. It was actually really hard to go back to powerlifting. Right now, I want to try all the things. Strong woman is
because when you go back to powerlifting, it's incredibly boring.
I wouldn't say it's boring. Like, there's something like, it's repetitive. I agree, it's repetitive, but there's something kind of meditative about what you're gonna get. So I do like that aspect of like training. Like, my training is not, because you like Bryce Krack's program, my training is not that varied. Like, I run the same cycle for, like, I think the last one I ran, it was almost 8 weeks of the exact same lifts, exact same like rep scheme, adding weight week to week. Like, I'm good. I'm usually pretty good with that. But strongman, when Blair approached me to try it out, I couldn't, I was just like, something about it just seemed so fun. So I knew I had to try it. And now that I've tried it, it's become a real problem. I just want to do more. I just want to try more. It's hard. It's really hard. Like, it's such a hard kind of sport. it's so much more like power. You need power, and like it's dynamic, which is not, I wouldn't say powerlifting is a very dynamic sport. It's a very controlled, stiff kind of like, yeah, exactly. And strongman's not that at all. Like you have to be able to hustle, and you have to be able to like use leg drive to move things. Like that's what I struggle with so hard. I'm not good at pressing overhead, not because I'm not strong. It's like I can't leg drive.
And that was a very dynamic competition. I mean, aside from the max deadlift, which was a 13-inch wagon wheel deadlift with an axle, aside from that, like it was a moving event heavy competition. And yeah, the log. So I watched from the side, and the log was not touching your body. You picked it up and almost like power snatched it to where you just picked it up and just put it over your head, and you got the down signal, and you just kind of straight armed it up and got the down signal for 16 reps.
Oh man, my coach actually laughed at me. He was like, why are you lateral raising the log above your head? He's like, you're not even like pressing it. He's like, it's not even a real viper press. You're just like muscling it over. And it's because it's light enough. Like I actually, it's funny.
It's hard that one event for the women, that event was one where you go, okay, that was probably too light. You know, when even the bottom end got 4 or 5 reps, I think, and the top end you and I want to say
Paula, I think Paula was up there.
Were in 14, 15, 16 reps. That's when you go, oh, okay. So next year, make that like 125. And yeah, your bottom end gets 2 reps, but the top end only gets 10 reps.
Yeah. Well, and the log, like that is, I actually just bought a log. So I want to get better at it so bad. The log for me, I can do 95 really easy, but I haven't been able to do more than, I think the max I've ever tried is 140. And the problem for me is I just can't, I need to be able to get the coordination down more than, you can only ugly muscle an implement that is that technical so much. And it really catches up to you when it gets heavier. Like it's easy to, whip it around when it's 90 pounds and I bench 260, but when it's getting over 120-ish, it starts getting harder for me just because, like leaning further back, the positioning, front rack position mine's crappy. Of course, I have tight pecs. It's things I need to work on, and getting that dynamic kind of, I want to learn how to jerk the log, like to actually do that. That is a whole nother ball game. And that's something I'm hoping to learn in the next kind of winter off season.
So how were you able to train for that competition? How much of the equipment were you able to get your hands on ahead of time?
So I was lucky that Blair was so kind and helpful, and he actually invited me out to train a few times. So I was able to get my hands on every implement at least once in advance. And initially, I had my training program designed that I was specifically doing strongman related kind of training. But 2 weeks into that program, we got the call for IPF Worlds. So I talked to my coach, and really the IPF Worlds is the goal. Strongman, it was something I was doing for fun. So we retailored my program to be pretty powerlifting heavy, and just a little room on like one of my training days for some strongman stuff. So it wasn't very strongman focused at all, only because, I think at that point I was 16 weeks out. And to me, that sounds like literally no time to prepare, because I think in training blocks, my training blocks are usually 6 weeks with a 2-week deload. There we go. We only have 2 training blocks to Worlds. Like that's no time to get ready. So I wanted to make sure I was still lifting specific enough and not going too far out of my regular training comfort zone so that I wouldn't get injured. Because that's the other thing, is like training this intense for this long, something's bound to happen eventually. So it's just kind of, you got to balance out what you want to do with what's the best plan for the goal at the time.
Right on. So now you're just about 8 weeks out from Worlds.
Yeah.
So you're in a deload right now, or just coming off a deload?
Yeah, I'm in the last week of a deload, and I just today got my program for Worlds, and I'm jazzed. It's going to be great. Bryce does something that's really interesting with his style of coaching, and I think a lot of coaches do it as well, is gathering data. Because I've worked with him for 3 years now, he knows we kind of create this best hit list of programs that have worked. Looking back at all of the 3 years of training, what kind of rep schemes have I hit PRs on? What kind of intensities, like, do I recover from high intensities? Do I need lower intensities? What for each individual lift? And because we have that data going into this, essentially we can just compile it and make this best hits program going into Worlds, where I even looking at the program, I know it's going to work. I know it. I know it's going to be a good program. And I know I'm going to get a lot of good success out of it. So it's pretty exciting.
Right on. So that gym in St. Stephen is opening again.
Really? Wild. That's exciting.
So a guy named Derek Randall, who owned a gym in Ontario, apparently has bought the gym in St. Stephen. I forget what it's called, Infinity Gym, something like that.
Yeah.
Infinity. Apparently he's bought it and is reopening it. So there you go.
Wow, that's awesome to have that. It was really nice to have a 24-hour gym, like you just swipe card enter. I wouldn't say I the equipment wasn't powerlifting focused by no means, but it's still having options. I think I'll always be, now that I have a home gym and I love not leaving my house, I think that'll be my primary workout location. But to have options is always nice. And I'm pretty spoiled to have awesome people nearby, like Blair, that have every strongman implement you could even dream of playing with. So I think even after Worlds, I'm going to be over there more, just doing more strongman things. I honestly think after Worlds, strongman will be my next kind of focus.
Well, after Worlds, you've only got about 4 weeks to the St. John Fall Strongman Friendly.
Yeah, I'm 100% planning on doing that, as long as I come out not too beat up from Worlds. That's why I've been trying to learn the Circus Dumbbell ways, but
the Circus Dumbbell is it's really easy because it's super intuitive that you jerk it. I've never been good at doing the double dip with a barbell or a log, but I can do it easily with the Circus Dumbbell. It feels like the natural way to do the Circus Dumbbell is to do a jerk, to dip and drive and dip and catch. And then the other events are Max Farmer's walk in a minute and sandbag over bar for reps.
Yeah, and I like the heavy the option to go heavier. I like the challenge. I always try and avoid cardio. I'd rather go heavier and do less if I can.
Well, I want for this kind of competition, I want everybody to get a rep in each event. Everybody that enters, I want everybody that enters to get a rep on every event. So the max dumbbell, we've got an 8-inch Circus Dumbbell for the women and a 12-inch for the men, that are both light enough empty that everybody should be able to get a rep. And then we're going to go heavy and light on the farmers and heavy and light on the sandbags. So everybody should get on the board and have fun.
And that's so important with strength sports in general, is just remembering why we do this. It's a hobby for most of us. It's, it's not how we make a living, and having those kind of competitions that are friendly and open. And I know, having you're hosting the St. John Friendly, and also having an amateur class in powerlifting competitions, which I never saw much in Alberta, but to see that here, having that, I think is so critical, because it's it can be very intimidating to have an option to feel like you're succeeding and beating your own best, which is really all that matters.
Yeah.
That's so key to getting hooked. And the more people hooked, the better.
Yeah, and the first I really saw that was the 2018 Hub City Open, which was the first um, open class competition that the quote unquote. And I was just talking to Tim Scantlebury, who ran the quote unquote old MBPL with Mark Wasson a few years ago. The Hub City Open 2018 was the first open competition that the new MBPL put on, and there was the morning was CPU members, all that, for lack of a better term, the fanfare that goes with it, checking the gear and all that stuff in the morning. And then in the afternoon was novice. You could come, as long as you'd never competed before, you could come in shorts and a t-shirt and not only get to participate, but get to learn how to do a powerlifting competition. And Drew Carlton at Fundy CrossFit, I mean, that competition in Moncton was like the basis of what is now Fundy Powerlifting, because he brought 5 or 6 people for the novice class, and they basically went back to St. John after that and really went hard at this Fundy Powerlifting. And now most of those people that did that novice have been competing ever since.
That's wild. And it totally does make sense when you think about, just getting under the bar and how that can be so kind of encouraging and getting people to stay from just doing a fun meet like that. That's phenomenal. And having that attitude towards the sport, I think, is really key. And I think the East Coast does a really good job of that. It could be that it's a little bit, I don't know if it's less competitive. It could be that it's less competitive because there's less athletes, but that attitude in general is just what makes people want to stay in the sport.
Yeah. So Danielle, I think that's a great spot to leave off for now. I hope you'll come back on the show, especially after Worlds and maybe after the St. John Fall Friendly, and we'll catch up. But thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me on. This is awesome.
All right. You've been listening to the Atlantic Strong podcast. As always, shout out to Danny Sutherland. Have a good night.